Hi, welcome to everyone who's come to our the discussion of Measure P. This is the League of Women Voters Community Forum, and our whole community is always invited to our third week of the month for a forum on a topic. And usually at this time of year, it has to do with the elections. So that's what we're doing. And we're going to go a quick segue into our moderator. And our announcements will be later.
We cannot pass out materials on the proposition.
Oh, and I just need to remind you that the materials are not passed out on the proposition, a pro, con, whatever, at this forum. If you want to do that, that happens off campus. Thanks. And here is Connie Hanna, our wonderful moderator for today.
Oh, we're very glad to have all of you come. And I am the chairman of the Sustainable Communities Committee, so we've been working on these issues for quite a while. During the summer, there was a whole lot of talk about Measure P, the Healthy Air and Water Initiative to ban fracking. The League decided that it would be the most help that we could give if we planned a neutral forum on this proposition, and we're eager to give you as much information about it as possible. To do that, we're extremely fortunate to have three well-known community leaders who have worked with us in the past and understand our goal in this forum. They are, and I'll indicate them to you, this is Shane Stark, former county council. This is, over here in the far corner is Dave Davis, the executive director of the Community Environmental Council, which we call lovingly CEC most of the time, and Lanny Ebenstein, who is a writer and former school board member that many of you will remember. I should say we are being filmed, so you all have to be on your best behavior because we're planning to run this on public television after we get done. And we thank Larry Nimmer for doing this for us. He's the person who always did touring with the candidates in the past and is very good at what he does. We wanted to begin this meeting with some background about what the state and local regulations already do to control the oil development. Shane Stark's years of working with the county qualify him well to talk about it. However, I want you to know that he is a very last-minute substitute. The official who was planning to come and whom we announced in the Channel Voter was unable at the last minute to come, and we drafted Shane, who works with the League a lot. He is president of the League's Education Fund, and he's working with us currently on several issues. However, when he agreed to do this, he had already committed to being in San Diego by 5 o'clock this afternoon. So what we are planning to do is let Shane talk to you first, and then we will understand when he leaves, and we hope drive slowly to San Diego. After Shane speaks, we will have him take about 5 minutes of questions to clarify anything that he said that you don't understand. And I wanted to say a bit about our roving mics. The League always uses roving microphones, and we will bring a microphone to anyone who wishes to speak. However, if we get long speeches, instead of questions, we'll go to written questions, which really none of us want to do very badly. And Joni's prepared if we have to go to written. So confine your questions to 2 questions so that we can get the benefit of the expertise of these 3 people. And now I give you Shane Stark.
Organization, the microphone. I'm a lot older than I used to be, and substantially feebler than I used to be. And I do want you to know that this envelope, which contains a plea for money from some organization or another, contains my sum total of research on this subject. Having been drafted, I should point to this time I was drafted. A bum knee doesn't help you at all. That's now. Thank you very much, Connie, Jean. I'm happy to be here, and my understanding of what I was asked to do is to help provide some context and some clarity regarding this ballot measure by providing some background on how the county's present system of regulating oil and gas development came to be, and possibly, if there's time, describing the present regulatory scheme. Since we're going to be on television and people are going to be watching, I thought I would start by, this is a name tent. There's a serious engineering flaw in the name. It has no bottom. I thought I'd make a few general comments about initiative measures generally. And I will point out that the State Ed Fund website has some very nice hints on how you go about voting on initiatives. I hope that people, when they remember to vote, remember that a ballot measure is actually, it's a law, and it's different when you vote on ballot measures from the way you feel when you vote for candidates. Ballot measures are laws that are fairly complicated sometimes, and they have long-term consequences that are difficult to change. Therefore, when you vote on an initiative, I recommend that you engage in a rational evaluation of what the measure will do, its effects, its benefits and costs, make a judgment as to whether the exercise of the initiative power is necessary, which comes largely down to a question of whether you trust your government or not, and a balancing of the policy values that are at stake and are adduced by various sides. And I urge you all to do the best you can. Look up Ballotpedia, look up the Smart Voter for general initiative guidelines. Now, on to the county oil regulation. Santa Barbara has produced oil for a long time. That Chumash used the natural seeps to caulk their tomals, I believe is how you pronounce that, their seagoing canoes. Elwood Mesa, a little bit up the road, was shelled by the Japanese during World War II. I heard they were aiming for Isla Vista, but missed. No offense, Isla Vistans. And I'll personally tell you, there were oil derricks all over the mesa. And I don't think they got a lot of oil, but that they were drilling all over the place. All during this time, oil production was largely unregulated. Technology for oil drilling changed after World War II. It allowed offshore drilling. The Congress enacted, I believe it's called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. In the early 50s, the state started to regulate tidelands. I probably know this. There's a 3-mile limit from the main high tideland. Seaward of the 3-mile limit is federal water, Outer Continental Shelf. Between the 3-mile limit and the mean high tide line, state tidelands and submerged land primarily regulated by the California State Lands Commission, an administrative agency with elected officials on it. Make no further comment about it. Incidentally, are you gentlemen members of the League? Why not? Why not? You should join. I've said it. It takes a real man to be a woman voter. I've said this several times. In any event, in the 50s, there's a pretty fair amount of oil production, both offshore and inland in the oil patch. Most of the oil, you probably know, most of the oil in Santa Barbara County is located in the northern part of the county, at least inland, as well as offshore. The 1969 oil spill, and if I have this right, it's the December 28th, 1969 is the date of the Union Oil blowout. January 28th, 69. See? Good for something. Good for something. This is my wife's former boss, so I feel free to ridicule him at almost every opportunity. The Santa Barbara oil spill is a real landmark event in environmental regulation. It woke people up. It not only woke people up around here, it woke people up in Sacramento, and it woke people up in Washington, D.C. The result in the early 70s is there started to be a fairly intensive amount of federal regulation. The National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. After the drilling moratorium was lifted, I believe, there's a drilling moratorium in California offshore waters. I believe Governor Reagan lifted it. And a set of state regulations developed in the 1970s. Notably, we got the California Environmental Quality Act, which we call CEQA, and the California Coastal Act, which was put in by an initiative and then subsequently made permanent by statute. All this time, from end of World War II through the 70s, the county regulated inland oil production through what they've known as its petroleum ordinance, still in effect. If you want to look it up, it is Title 25 or Chapter 25 of the County Land Use Code. That's where you will find it. The state, through an agency which used to be called DOG, but that wasn't fierce enough, now they made it DOGGER. It's a good acronym. Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources. I think they just added the geothermal to get the extra G in the acronym. DOGGER has a set of regulations. The county has a petroleum code, and they are interrelated. The county petroleum code cross-references and says that it is subject to conflicting state regulations covering the same subject. Both the technology and the regulatory climate surrounding oil and gas production changed several times. During the 70s and the 80s, the county aggressively regulated local components of development in state waters. They attempted to engage in as much influence as they could on federal control of offshore oil development, and they pretty much technically regulated the safety aspects of inland oil production. With respect to offshore production, the county was basically at the forefront of local energy regulation. People from the Air Pollution Control District and the county's energy division contributed to Clean Air Act amendments, I think Clean Water Act amendments having to do with oil production. The energy division was a pretty robust regulatory agency. I will tell you, since it found my way up to Santa Barbara County, there were many lawsuits in the 1980s between the county and the state on the one hand, and the oil companies on the other hand. They hired me. I'm a happy guy. The net result is there's a whole system of regulations, permits, settlements, and environmental impact reports governing production in Santa Barbara County. As the technology and the law continued to evolve, California dealt in a regulatory fashion with such things as climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. There's a state statute that requires local entities to make plans to deal with that. And most recently, issues with fracking and other secondary recovery in operations. The County Land Use Code, which is familiarly known as the zoning ordinance, the County Land Use Code has been re-engineered several times. They use the term engineer loosely in case one of you people is an actual engineer. I don't want to insult anyone. This is industrial relations processing. In any event, the regulation of inland oil production migrated. It first was run basically out of the building department. Then it went to North County Development Review. And then most recently, it went from Development Review to the Energy Division, which is a step that was A, blessedly after I retired, and B, fraught with some controversy, if I understand correctly. I'm going to get a little drink of water. I'm old. I'm not that old. I forget something every day, but I try to forget the right things. Not always easy. In any event, most recently, the county amended its land use code in 2011, and the state recently adopted legislation commonly known as SB 4, specifically to address fracking and other forms of secondary oil regulation. If I've got time, I'll briefly describe what the schemes are. There is a dual regulatory scheme. Here's how you remember it. State regulation applies from the wellhead to the center of the earth. If it's in the pipe, it's a state primary regulation. County regulation applies outward from the wellhead to the navigable airspace of the U.S., the navigable waters of the U.S., and the county borders. So outside the wellhead, county land use. Inside the wellhead, state oil and gas regulation. Okay? Lovely. The schemes, as I mentioned, they are coordinated, and they're pretty highly engineered. There's a nifty, I use the term advisedly, form that you fill out, both for a state permit and noticing and for the county. And there is a checklist with a number of boxes, and there are things that you have to do. You have to have a groundwater plan and an air plan, et cetera, in order to get your permits. The current state scheme's a little complicated because the state law is moving. It's not static. SB 4 required the state to engage in a big study of fracking. I think it's in progress. They say it's nearly done, but it hasn't been finished. It required Dogger to adopt a set of regulations that addresses secondary well treatments, fracking, and the like. At present, they have adopted, in July, I think, interim final temporary regulations. You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this up. Interim final temporary regulations, which are in effect and which govern the Dogger process, the state regulatory process, if you want to engage in these various techniques. So far, they distinguish between well stimulation, which is fracking, and acid injection stimulation, and other secondary recovery techniques. They don't have the regulations for the other secondary techniques, but they do have regulations in place for fracking and acid well stimulation. The bottom line is if an operator wants to engage in hydraulic fracturing and gets a permit from Dogger, if you do everything they want, which is submit your air quality plan, your groundwater contamination plan, notify the neighbors, put in a list of your chemicals, et cetera, fairly rich regulatory process, you will get the permit. They will not stop you. The state will not stop you from fracking. The county system is a little different. The county petroleum ordinance basically is triggered by a notice that they get from DOGR that somebody is going to engage in a petroleum operation. The petroleum code defines secondary recovery operations very broadly. The land use code treats fracking differently than anything else. If you want a fracking permit, if you want to begin fracking, you need a discretionary permit from the Planning Commission. Well, I think it's an oil and production plan. It might be a conditional use permit, functionally the same. The point is, Planning Commission, discretionary permit, environmental assessment. If you're engaged in a secondary recovery operation other than fracking, you go through the petroleum administrator. That's Mr. Drude, Kevin Drude, who he'd have been here, but he violated Shane Stark's second rule of political posture: never stand between two elected officials. Or in his case, 4 elected officials, 2 on one side, 2 in the other. Absolute worst place that a neutral county employee can possibly be. Me, I'm happy. I don't want pension. In any event, the petroleum administrator will process a request for secondary treatments other than fracking through a regulatory system that's very similar to DOGR. There are notices that are required. There are points along the way in which conditions can be attached, notably to protect groundwater, hazardous materials, and the like. There is a checkoff point for environmental assessment, but it is a less rigorous process, and the operator will get to engage in the procedure. I'll give you a cautionary note. The cautionary note is the devil here is in the details. The definitions in the various laws are not exactly the same, and the treatment of the permit processing of the various secondary recovery operations depends on the zone that it's in, whether it's within a previously approved production field, and specifically whether the practice has been approved in the previous previously approved production plan, and most important or most significant from the county's regulatory purposes, whether they're using any fresh groundwater in the process. If they're not using fresh groundwater in their secondary recovery process, they have a significantly easier permit path than if they're using groundwater. Is that enough regulatory scheme? That's basically it. There are definitions. How am I doing on time? Am I fine? I will skip what I was going to do. I was going to paraphrase the ballot summary, and I won't, because I will indicate that the ballot summary is pretty clear and descriptive in basic terms about what this initiative covers and what it does. It's reasonably easy to understand. I commend the ballot summary to you. When the county council's analysis and the auditor's fiscal impact statement come out, I commend them to you as well in terms of the basics of this. The details of this initiative are pretty complicated and far-reaching, but the basic principle is pretty easy to understand. High-intensity petroleum operations are defined and they are prohibited in the county's general plan, and they are prohibited in the county's zoning ordinance. There's a vested rights exception, and there's a takings exception. And if I understand correctly, the county is going to hold a hearing, the Board of Supervisors will hold a hearing on whether they're going to adopt an ordinance that's intended to provide an administrative remedy, thereby avoiding interim taking damages. That, I believe, fucking regulatory scheme, remember to vote. Oh, yes, here you go. I'm happy to answer a few questions, as long as you understand that, A, I represent the education fund, the nonprofit tax-deductible education fund, and the Ed Fund is silent on all ballot measures as well as candidates. I'm not going to take a position. Please don't ask me for any advocatory. The other thing that I think you need to understand, or it would be helpful to understand, you don't need anything. All you need to do is push the thing for the people you want. Remember to vote for the person you want to and not the person you don't want to. It's very simple. But B, I think it'd be useful. Vested rights is a legal concept. It comes directly out of a state constitution. It'll be determined by the courts, fact-specific, depends on precisely the regulatory path that is followed, precisely the sums that are spent in reliance on that regulatory path. I would be extremely reluctant to the point where I would rule it out of making any predictions about how the vested rights doctrine is going to be applied in the various matters that will come before the county should this initiative pass. Is that it? Okay. I'm gonna see the Phillies game in San Diego at Pension Reform Now Park. Question. They renamed it after the conflict of interest. Any questions? Ah, clarity. I'm a happy guy. Is that it? No. Ooh, a question. I thought I was going to get out of here with no question.
Shane, do you know exactly what the chemicals are that they use in fracking?
Well, first of all, I will tell you, the University of Denver Rocks for Jocks course, I did not get a great deal of chemical knowledge. No, I do not. I do know that under both the state and the county schemes, the chemicals are required to be disclosed, and I think there's dual disclosure. One is before they start, and then there's a further disclosure that they have to do 60 days after it's finished. And there's also a trade secret prevention thing. It's pretty complicated, but no, I don't personally know what they're using.
Hi. In your opinion, professionally or personally, do you feel that the County of Santa Barbara adequately regulates the oil and gas industry currently?
I would not give an opinion as to adequacy. I will tell you that the regulatory philosophy of the county has been to respect the property rights of the oil people, but to regulate them as vigorously as they can in order to stop various forms of pollution. How well they do it is, it's a matter of opinion.
Can we make it clear that one way or another that this measure does, here, Shane, that this measure does or does not shut down oil drilling in the county?
That is my understanding. I can't answer that. My understanding is that is speculative based on the question of what will happen should it pass. Bear in mind that should it pass and it put people out of business, there will probably be lawsuits that will determine the extent to which people can remain in business without getting additional permits. It's a complicated question, and I understand the rhetoric, but trying to answer that in a scientific, predictive sense, I think is pretty much impossible at this point.
Do you have a percentage of the drilling that's going on that does use fresh groundwater currently in Santa Barbara County?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. That's a sort of factual information I just don't have. I think that Mr. Drute, the Energy Division, could probably answer that. They have some information on the Energy Division's website. I don't know if they have that. You might try asking them. Is that it? Thank you.
We want to thank Shane Stark for filling in for us. And I do want to clarify one thing that he said. He talked about the Energy Division being caught between two supervisors in the north and two in the south, and there's a reason for that. The environmental community of the South is strongly behind this ballot measure, and almost all of the impacts will be on the North County. And I think it's important for you to bear that in mind when we're talking about it, because all of this kind of oil development is taking place in North County. And that has divided the supervisors into camps, and I can understand why. They have totally different views of this particular ballot measure. Shane, drive carefully. We count on you. And I also wanted to ask, for a show of hands, if there's anybody in the room besides me who remembers the horrible hearings during the 1980s when we fought the oil companies to get control over the offshore oil. Is there anybody who... Linda Kropp in the back, of course, Amanda, Dave Davis, and Beverly King. We all were at those hearings, and I can tell you it was a lively, difficult time. And so we will bear that in mind, because whenever you're trying to regulate the oil industry, you have a lot of pitched battles to go through, and I think that happens every time you try to initiate new regulations.
Joni Jones, and I'm calling you back to continue with our discussion on Measure P. And I introduce you to Connie Hanna again.
Oh, that's a great audience. You whip right into shape. We're going to start with Dave Davis from Community Environmental Council, because he's doing the PowerPoint. And we'd like to get the screen out of our way eventually, so we're going to start with the screen. And we have worked with Dave for a long time around energy issues, because that's one of CEC's principal concerns, and it's one of our concerns. And I should say that Gene Holmes, who is our energy consultant and who consults with the State League on energy issues, has arranged this whole program. And I'd just like a little applause for her right now. Jean is invaluable to us in dealing with oil and all energy issues, so we're delighted to have her. And CEC has worked long and hard on energy issues themselves, and they had a Fossil Free by 33 campaign that was very well known. And so Dave is used to dealing with all of these energy issues, and he's an excellent person to come and discuss why CEC is supporting this measure. Dave.
Thank you, Connie. I actually wanted to thank Jean too, because we had lots of correspondence going back and forth, and it stole my thunder because I really wanted to say great job putting this together. I also want to say, actually watching Shane, we miss you, Shane. I gotta tell you. Wow, that's all I can say. There was a question out there, and again, I'm speaking, I will tell you in a second, I'm speaking for CEC. I'm not speaking for the campaign. I'm not speaking for any of the folks that are involved with the Water Guardians. The impacts of Measure P, they're bigger than the North-South thing. Come on, the North-South thing is like, it's minor. It's really bigger. So I don't have a clicker, so Jefferson is my clicker. Put your camera down, Jefferson, get me to my first slide. Okay? This is a slide that basically says that, you know what, when you're trying to do change, and Measure P is trying to enact really substantial change as in the business as usual, right? There is nothing more perilous to conduct, nothing more uncertain in success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order. The innovator has for enemies all of those people and corporations who have done well under the old conditions, and very frankly, lukewarm defenders in those who may do well under the new. That was Machiavelli in 1532. And if you don't think that's a truism, watch the evolution of this campaign. With Measure P, we're going to be looking at a David and Goliath struggle. And by the way, I'm David. On November 4th, we will be going to the polls to make Santa Barbara County the first major oil-producing region in the nation to ban high-risk oil extraction techniques. It's a chance to protect the people of our county from extreme forms of oil development that are severely damaging communities around the United States. So why is CEC involved, and why has it endorsed this measure? As I said, I am not part of the campaign team. You won't hear campaign rhetoric. You'll hear my rhetoric. The board of directors did vote to endorse this measure. For those of you who don't know us, we are not the California Energy Commission. We are the original CEC, right? We were founded in 1969, after the 1970, following the 1969 oil spill a year later. We are a solutions-oriented organization. You don't see us come out and take positions on projects or issues very often. But we have taken a position the board of directors has taken a position to endorse Measure P. We've been working for 40 years on all sorts of environmental problems, and I won't go through those from recycling to hazardous waste to creek protection to you know what. But in 2004, Justin, watch me, buddy. We did retool ourselves to focus on the issues of climate change and oil production. And we did put out a blueprint for Santa Barbara County of how this region could get off of fossil fuels within one generation. Yes, it was a nice, actually interesting moniker of Fossil Free by 33. I remember the guy who thought that up, and we all kind of laughed at him, and of course it kind of stuck. And we get phone calls going like, well, why are you going after fossils? I mean, what did they ever do? Frankly, when you read our plan, if you know what we've been talking about, the forums that I have been here with the League of Women Voters on the issue of climate change, CEC believes that climate change is the defining economic, environmental, and social justice issue of our time. And if you don't believe that, you can tune out now, because what you're going to hear from me it essentially focuses a lot on the bigger picture of why Measure P is so important. So how and why did CEC get to the position of endorsing such a thing? Go. Climate change is real. I'm not going to debate climate change here today because it isn't debatable. It's happening. And once you recognize that it's happening, if you don't believe it and you want to make the counter arguments and you want to be a denier, have a nice day, because we as a society, we as a world, are going to deal with the effects of climate change. California basically got ahead of this and they passed the Global Warming Solutions Act under Governor Schwarzenegger. But let me just take you through a quick roadmap of why action is beyond just simply regulation by a county, regulation by a dogger. 4 years ago, the oil companies, and we all know this, put forward Proposition 23. That was to overturn and suspend what was AB 32. Nice play on words, 3223, right? Secretary of State had a little funny there. That actually went to the ballot, and again, CEC did step out at that time saying, wrong. Climate change is so significant. What you're seeing here is a disoriented campaign to basically move California off that position. 62% of the voters of California turned down Proposition 23. And if any of you are involved in elections, 62% is a slam dunk, overwhelming majority. Really serious. The state basically went and started to look at a state oil severance tax, recognizing that oil development actually uses up resources, and we're going to go through some of those: water, traffic, roads, infrastructure, you name it, right? And in fact, they should pay their fair share. All the other states, Texas, you name it, whatever, they have oil severance taxes to make the industry pay their way. No, boy, the lobbyists came out to Sacramento. It was a big time slam dunk. There was no way an oil severance tax was going to make it through the legislature. Why? Because they were going to not only oppose it privately behind closed doors, but when the next election came, they were going to fund candidates to run against them in big time financial numbers to basically make sure that these types of things don't happen again. AB 32, oil severance tax, and in fact, let's go local. We talked about it here in the county of Santa Barbara. And again, we had the ability to do something to pay for the external costs that this industry is paying to basically externalize their costs. Again, the lobbyists got in there, and I got to tell you, I sat through most of those hearings. A lot of the people that are in this room from the industry basically were lobbying hard not to do this, and basically threatening, as they always do, threatening either litigation and or political change in the next election. It's too bad. Go. So there was a movement, and Doss Williams and Hannah Beth Jackson got behind a moratorium. Come on, time out, right? We want to know what's happening with this stuff. And we tried to move through the legislature with at least a time out to try to basically get some understanding of what's happening. And frankly, what came out of that was SB 4. You heard Shane talk about it. You know, he didn't tell you that essentially it allowed production to continue as is. And don't think that, in fact, behind the scenes in Sacramento, things are basically being, if you will, manipulated today to the industry's benefit. SB 4 was not something organizations like CEC supported. I know. And again, SB4 started as a very good, again, being the legislative process, it starts as a good measure, and basically by the time it gets to the end, there are amendments being made, and the final amendments, which basically exempted from CEQA and allowed existing production to go forward, no one had a chance to even react to. It was done at the last minute. Santa Maria Energy, right? I could go through the 9 yards, but in a short version, CEC took a position of like, look, we understand oil production, blah, 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 right? Let's try to at least just have decent limits on the carbon, greenhouse gas, methane issues which come out of that type of oil production. In fact, we testified in front of the Board of Supervisors. We don't oppose the project. We just want to see reasonable thresholds adopted. And if you followed that one, demonized. You can't believe what they basically said and did to essentially say, no, don't do that, do these higher standards. We don't really want to address the carbon pollution coming from our operations. Santa Maria Energy really affected at least CEC. Could you really, on a one-to-one basis, on a project-by-project basis, negotiate your way to regulation which actually work? Since that time, of course, they have, go ahead, they have announced that essentially almost 7,700 new wells, after they got approved, could be coming. And while they're going to tell you, we don't use any water, no one's going to show me that like 7,000 to 10,000 new wells isn't going to use a lot of water in Santa Barbara County. I won't believe it. I'll wait to see what Lanny has to say. This is kind of cute. Greenhouse gas is groovy. This is from Bloomberg. They haven't stopped, right? They haven't stopped. Behind the scenes, the oil companies are funding, after basically saying we want to live by the state rules, they're basically funding these kind of phony grassroots organizations to oppose and to mobilize the public to oppose the implementation of the cap and trade in California on the petroleum industry, right? When we went to Santa Maria Energy, everybody said, well, cap and trade's going to regulate us. The state's going to regulate us, right? Behind the scenes, they're out working right now to get rid of the regulations. Go ahead. Drivers Alliance, if you hadn't seen the full-page ads in the LA Times and San Francisco Chronicle, basically saying, my God, gas prices are going to go up. And you know why? Because they're doing stuff to us in Sacramento. Government is bad. And yeah, man, they're pushing those nerves and they're making it happen. Go look who funds these organizations. Go ahead. So let's talk about the Monterey Shale, right? And you're going to hear this stuff, the fracking doesn't happen here or whatever. They haven't figured out exactly how to get to the Monterey Shale. Go ahead, right? It is 4 times larger than what's going on in North Dakota. And I dare any of you to drive around North Dakota and tell me how pretty that state's environment is today. If you look at the proliferation of wells and the damage which is being done to their aquarium, California is sitting on a major reserve. They're going to tell, I'll get there. I'm getting ahead of myself. So what we're looking at, right, rather than Measure P, is we're looking at project after project after project. We're looking at big-time dollars being put into campaigns, political and other. We're looking at teams of attorneys, some of which may be sitting in the room from very large law firms, which are being paid very big dollars in order to frustrate the will of Santa Barbara County people. There are threats of litigation every time you do a project, let alone something like this. And there is way too much money to be left in the ground to let that happen. We are not looking at a level playing field. Remember, the oil industry has one fundamental goal: to reap maximum profits for their shareholders. Maximum profits for their shareholders. In many cases, you do that by socializing your external pollution and your social costs to the rest of us in the community. Don't be fooled by the rhetoric. Look at their actual actions, because you're going to hear a lot of rhetoric today. There's no question. Look at their actions. Go ahead. Oh. If you can find out what they're doing, because if you read the local news press and their editorials, global warming is a total hoax and a fake. And again, one of the things that they've been very good to do in terms of the press, demonize, marginalize, and then capitalize. They demonize the people who speak against them. Katie, for one, has just been raked over the coals in the press. They marginalize the groups like Water Guardians or even CEC, who've been here for 40 years doing good work. They marginalize us, and then they capitalize on people's fear by the campaigns that they're able to put out there. Why? Because there is mega bucks that are to be made. Oh, go back one. I'm sorry. I loved it because this was news press, right? And it basically is talking about Nixon's proposing banning oil. But if you went into the paragraph and you look at the details, it said this issue is bigger than Santa Barbara. And no matter what they tell you, north, south, whatever, this issue is much bigger than Santa Barbara, as we will get into. We went to a symposium up in Buellton a year ago. Go. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry, put this together an hour ago. And their goal will ultimately be to basically control the politics and the regulations of Santa Barbara County. Lanny and I disagree that that's going to change very often. Look at the money that they put into that particular campaign for my friend Roger Aceves. Look at basically who the major campaign donors were. Not in his district, all right? Honestly, they were people from the North County. They know that when the board is 3-2 the other way, those regulations basically can be suspended or relieved. Went to a symposium that was put on by a North County group, and we were given 5 minutes to talk about renewable energies, and then they spent 5 hours talking about other things. It was a cheerleading group for a boomtown economy. That in fact, if we're sitting on stuff like North Dakota, we can have boom times here, and people in that room, they're hungry. We've come out of the Great Recession. People are hungry for change and stability. They had folks from North Dakota and Houston. I tell you, North Dakota or the city of Houston are not Santa Barbara at all. They had people there cheerleading, I swear to God, how good times will be. The good times are gonna roll. But you all know, let's just assume that we go for the boom. You all know what comes after the boom, right? This past spring, 19,000 voters. 19,000 voters said enough. Enough. They want the opportunity to have their voices heard over the money, over the noise, over the ads. They want their voices heard. And you know what's coming next? The fossil fuel industry has already a war chest of millions of dollars. It gets reported. Most of what you won't see till after the campaign, by the way. A lot of stuff will come in after the reporting period. They're set to outspend the local grassroots supporters by 40-1 or more. We'll be flooded with industry-funded TV ads, radio ads, online banner ads, mailers, robocalls. You're gonna hear it all, right? It's just begun. Thank you for my firefighter friends who basically are looking forward to larger pensions in the future. They're gonna say, fracking isn't happening here. Well, don't tell that to Venego, who did frack here before. And don't tell that to all the people who are lining up their capital to look at that Monterey Shale or the diatomite, which is up in the North County. Don't tell them that, in fact, fracking isn't happening. When they figure out how to get the oil, you know what we're talking about, don't you? All of these issues, the conventional oil basically leaves little nodules of stuff, right? And they force it out with high energy and high water and high heat. Fracking isn't happening here, don't tell Venego. They'll say, fracking is currently very well regulated. Yeah, we've been doing that for a long time too, and you can basically talk about this, that, and the other. They'll say these extraction techniques are completely safe. I'm sorry, I'm from Louisiana. I don't buy that one anymore, right? I have relatives in the Gulf. I don't buy that one. And that was more for shock value. I'm surprised you guys didn't go, oh my God. But I don't believe it anymore. Human error happens. Mistakes happen, right? And the consequences come back to you. They're going to tell you that California oil is clean compared to everything else in the world. The average U.S. barrel consumed, that's the U.S. barrel, that's everything combined, right? California heavy oil. Forget it, guys. It's out there in terms of how dirty it is. It's equal to the shale oils in Canada. It doesn't use fresh water. I won't go much farther than to say, you know what? If it's using produced water, recycled water, groundwater, do I want to tell you that water is so precious that it shouldn't be used for these types of things which essentially cause these effects upon us in the world and cost what they do, when in fact they should be used for things which are much more productive. And during the drought, it is very, and again, looking at the issue of climate change, this is the beginning, we believe, of essentially a changing climate. Measure P will cost thousands of jobs. The job thing, you saw that back on Prop 23. The jobs thing's always good. It scares it scares the bejesus out of people. Right? Well, oil is less than 1% of the jobs, man. Even when you put in the indirect jobs, it's less than 1%. It's like, this is not one of the areas that basically we should be worried about Santa Barbara County going into the tank. Ain't gonna happen, I'm sorry. Measure P will cause total economic ruin. The county's gonna go bankrupt. Well, the property taxes, oil do pay. There's no question, they pay. And when you hear numbers, you're gonna hear these numbers go, wow, that's a lot of money. No, not in the scheme of things. It is not a lot of money. And then you're gonna hear, right, Measure P is gonna shut down the entire oil industry. Well, I won't go into the fact of peak oil and the fact that ultimately the oil industry will shut down. We're talking about extraction of a finite resources, and if it ain't now, it's 2020. It's going away, okay? But it applies to future extraction by fracking, acidizing, steam injection. I'm not gonna go through the details of what those are. Trust me, go look at it elsewhere. I can tell you that it doesn't apply to existing ongoing projects, new conventional drilling, vested rights are legal. You heard that from Shane. I think I have another slide. Yeah, I do, okay? So here's your petroleum code that he was talking about. Shane got ahead of me. He already put it in there, right? Put it up there. Go. Okay, so you got definitions for secondary enhanced recovery operations, well servicing. I don't know. Go one forward and see what I got. No, go back. So, right, it's going to shut down the industry. Number one, if you are an existing use, you are, and if Shane was here, you're a legally non-conforming use even if this thing passes, meaning you can continue your operations as long as your permit is good, right? You're not going to touch any existing operation. If you have well servicing, you want to use, and the big thing, what I've heard, and again, you know, I'm not the expert. You got guys in this audience who know a lot more than I do. If you go in and you're doing well servicing in order to maintain your well, and you got to use acidizing or whatever, right? If you look at the petroleum code, no, it's exempt. It doesn't basically cover that type of activity. If in fact you got a well which is drying up and you want to go in and do secondary enhanced recovery operations and you want to use these enhanced dangerous techniques, yeah, it's going to basically affect those particular items. Unless that particular owner basically says, no, I have a vested right and shows county evidence of that case, that they have a vested right to go forward. They've spent money on Reliance, da-da-da. And yes, they're going to be a lawsuit or two. I'm not afraid that they're going to be a lawsuit or two because the oil industry will sue every time the county tries to do something which affects their interests. So I'm not afraid of that. I'm really proud of the Water Guardian people who put in the exemptions for both vested rights as well as the takings issue. It's basically said, look, if you got vested rights and you think you have a takings issue, you show the county. Now, hey, can the county screw up that administrative hearing and basically get themselves tied in a knot and whatever? Probably, right? The county's pretty good at that stuff.
We've used up your time.
Okay, I'm going to go real fast then. Why do we do this? We're going to move to clean energy. We're going to conserve and protect our precious water supply, right? That's all the fresh water there is on the face of the earth. Okay, it's too big a risk. I haven't talked about earthquakes. I haven't talked about cancer. I haven't talked about any of those other kinds of issues, but they're out there. Santa Barbara can lead. What future do we choose? Your vote on Measure P will determine the future of Santa Barbara County. And in the much larger scheme of things, collectively, what we and others do as a nation will determine how we live, where we live, and ultimately, if we live. Vote yes on Measure P.
Oh, carefully, yeah, thank you. We'll give Lanny equal time, and I want to introduce him now. We knew that he was opposing this measure because he'd written an op-ed piece in the news press about it. But Lanny is a past president of the County Taxpayers Association. He teaches at UCSB and is the author of 10 books on economics and political science. He grew up in Santa Barbara and is a graduate of local schools. He served on the Santa Barbara Board of Education from 1990 to 1998, and many of you know him from that time. He worked closely with the League on the ballot measure designed to lower height limits in the city of Santa Barbara. We lost that vote by a very narrow margin, but I'm happy to report that the city has been working almost entirely within the 40-foot height limit ever since, so the efforts that we put into it were not lost. And now I give you Len.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this League of Women Voters Forum today on Measure P. I should say that it's always a pleasure to see my former second grade teacher, Carol Legasic, so a longtime resident of Santa Barbara, and I've appreciated the opportunity to work with the League in the past, as Connie noted. And should be noted that Dave and I believe, participated in a forum in this very location at that time. And it should be noted that he was on the other side of that issue. And so we'll just note that in passing. This is an important issue. And it's important to remember that these are factual questions, and people can have different views, but ultimately the facts are what they are, and it's up to the voters to determine which facts, the facts that they think are most important, and that's what I'm going to try to present today. There should be no doubt about it. If Measure P passes, there will be great change in Santa Barbara County. According to the County of Santa Barbara itself, in its official analysis of the proposed initiative, every single oil and gas operation in the county, onshore oil and gas operation in the county, currently uses at least one of the productive techniques that would be banned by Measure P. Moreover, if Measure P passes, it would not only affect current oil and gas operations in the county, it would preclude or prevent from coming into being future onshore oil and gas operations. If Measure P passes, it would be a tragedy. It would be a tragedy for our county's economy, a tragedy for public services in the county and the state, and a tragedy for the environment. Since opponents of Measure P since arguments against Measure P on the basis of its deleterious consequences for our area's economy and public services are already prominent, I will start my comments with remarks on the negative consequences of Measure P on the environment. Let there be no doubt about it. If Measure P passes, it would be the most harmful initiative ever passed in Santa Barbara County regarding its negative consequences for the environment. If Measure P passes, more oil and gas would be produced outside of the United States, where environmental standards for energy production are lower. If Measure P passes, more oil and gas would be lost into the environment through the tankering of oil and gas to the United States from such places as Iraq and Russia. Moreover, if Measure P passes, more American servicemen and servicewomen would lose their lives in foreign lands in efforts to secure energy resources abroad. I'm an environmentalist. I'm a past treasurer of the local Coastal Preservation Coalition and the Small Wilderness Area Preserves. As long as we require oil and gas, it's better to produce them in California and Santa Barbara County, where the environmental regulations and enforcement of these regulations are among the most stringent in the world. California and the United States would benefit from energy independence, so we don't need to rely on foreign countries with lax environmental regulations. The safety and environmental issues of tankering more oil to the United States and California are real. One local environmental organization stated that tankering oil and gas is more harmful to the environment than sending these resources by pipeline, by listing as one of its top accomplishments in recent years the cessation of oil barging. The organization noted that tankering oil causes, quote, air pollution, noxious odors, and the risk of a major oil spill. According to Professor Eric Smith of the Department of Political Science and Bren School at UCSB, quote, there are relatively high environmental costs associated with importing oil as opposed to producing it in the United States. There are three problems with importing oil. First, spills from tankers and barges are the largest human-caused source of oil in the oceans. The groundings of the Exxon Valdez, the Castillo de Belver, and the Amoco Cadiz, to name a few, all had severe impacts on local ecosystems. Second, the countries from which we import oil have lower environmental standards than the United States. In particular, many foreign oil producers choose to vent methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, directly into the atmosphere rather than spending extra money to capture or flare it. Third, shipping oil to the United States requires burning a huge amount of diesel oil, the exhaust from which is a greenhouse gas pumped into the atmosphere. Just as environmentalists argue that eating locally grown food is better for the planet because it saves transportation costs and energy, locally produced oil has less of a negative impact, unquote. No one who considers herself or himself an environmentalist should vote for Measure P. With respect to its influence on the economy, Measure P would also be a disaster. I teach in the economics department at UCSB. There is no question that energy production has as much stimulative impact on the private economy as any other activity. According to the UCSB Economic Forecast Project's September 2013 report on the Santa Barbara County oil and natural gas industry, the total economic impact of the onshore oil and natural gas industry in Santa Barbara County in 2011 was $291.4 million. The total impact of the onshore oil and natural gas industry was 1,953 jobs, including direct and indirect employment. Also in 2011, Santa Barbara County's onshore oil and natural gas industry paid approximately $49.2 million in local, state, and federal taxes. The fact of the matter is that a vote for Measure P is a vote for more child poverty in Santa Barbara County. It is a vote for more unemployment in Santa Barbara County. It would be a vote for fewer social services provided by nonprofit agencies, which are supported by the onshore oil and natural gas industry in the county. Unemployment remains high in many communities in Santa Barbara County. In Santa Maria, Lompoc, and Guadalupe in particular, unemployment has remained 10% or higher in recent years. High-paying jobs in Santa Barbara County's onshore oil and natural gas industry provide the best hope of escape from poverty for thousands of county residents, including children. Pursuant to a study on poverty commissioned by the Board of Supervisors that was released in the summer of 2013, the child poverty rate in some Santa Barbara County neighborhoods is 40%. But economic circumstances for young children are even more dire than the 40% figure for all children in these neighborhoods indicates. Because younger children are more likely to live in poverty than older children, the young child poverty rate in some county neighborhoods exceeds 1 young child in 2. Do we really want 1 young child in 2 living in poverty in Santa Maria, Lompoc, and Guadalupe? If the answer to this question is no, please vote no on Measure P. As the UCSB Economic Impact Study on the county onshore oil and natural gas industry also noted, the industry, quote, provides an important source of high-wage jobs in an economy that is projected to predominantly add low-paying professions in the near future. The average employee in the county onshore oil and natural gas industry earns an annual salary between $75,000 and $100,000, in sharp contrast to the median household income of $58,000 in Santa Barbara County in 2011, unquote. And again, those figures would be, as to the average household income in Santa Barbara County, even lower in North County. Again, a vote for Measure P would be a vote for more child poverty and unemployment in Santa Barbara County. Please vote no on Measure P. Concerning its influence on state and local government finances, there can be no question that Measure P would deprive local schools, the County of Santa Barbara, and other local and state government agencies of tens of millions of dollars per year over time. If you support more spending on education, please vote no on Measure P. I served 8 years on the Santa Barbara Board of Education, and I'm committed to increased funding for local education and education throughout the state at all levels, from preschool to graduate school. And I believe I've signed 5 ballot arguments in favor of increased funding for education in our community. Santa Barbara is predominantly an educational community. Santa Barbara City College, UCSB, Allen Hancock, and the kindergarten through 12th grade public school districts throughout the county provide an education to nearly 125,000 students per year, more than 1 resident in 4 in the county. If you support increased funding for these nearly 125,000 students in public schools in the county, please vote no on Measure P. Measure P is opposed by both Santa Barbara County firefighters and the Deputy Sheriff's Association. If you support adequate funding for police and fire, please vote no on Measure P. If you support adequate funding for parks, roads, environmental services, planning, and other vital services of local and state government, please vote no on Measure P. Measure P is a drastic, flawed, and costly proposal. Because it has been placed on the ballot through the initiative process, no environmental impact report or study has been performed on it to explore what its comprehensive environmental consequences would be. And I would hope that would be a very important issue to individuals who would consider supporting it. Measure P is not what it seems to be. Its promoters attack fracking, but there are no onshore wells in the county that use fracking, nor are there any plans for there to be. Our local geology is not amenable to fracking. What Measure P would do is prohibit safe oil and natural gas production techniques that have been used in the county for decades. Nearly all oil and natural gas wells in the county regularly have to use one or more of the production processes that would be banned by Measure P. There can be no exemptions approved by the Board of Supervisors or any other local elected body to an initiative passed by the people. Measure P would expose the County of Santa Barbara to hundreds of millions of dollars of liability in lawsuits. From whatever perspective you look at it, Measure P would be a disaster for the people of Santa Barbara County. If you support a cleaner environment, please vote no on Measure P. If you support a healthier economy, please vote no on Measure P. If you support more funding for local schools and other government agencies, please vote no on Measure P. In closing, I would like to say that I'm a lifelong resident of Santa Barbara County, and I love this county and its environment. Please vote no on Measure P. Thank you very much.
Why don't we take a couple of clarification questions, and then we're going to open it to discussion with both men.
Nobody heard that.
Okay.
You have to get on the mic. Nobody heard that.
Okay.
Here.
Oh, is that one working? Yeah. Sure. Oh, it's heavy. I was just saying, Lanny can take a couple of minutes of questions about what he has just said, and then we're going to sit down with both men and let them take questions from the audience, and both of them will be able to answer them. But if you have a couple of questions for Lanny, he has time left to take a couple. Oh, I see one in the back and one over here.
Go ahead.
Can you hear? Yeah, okay. I have a combined question for you. The first part is from what you said your qualifications are. I didn't hear anything that qualifies you in any way to comment on environmental issues. I didn't hear you having any expertise at all on the environment, as opposed to an organization that's been around since 19 for a very long time. That's the first part of my question. And the second part is not so much, okay, my question is, what do you think of the alternate benefit to the economy of simply raising the minimum wage so that minimum wage workers are not living in poverty? And that would eliminate the amount of poverty in the North County. And I'm sorry, there's one other factor. Every oil company worker that I have met, and I have not met the executives, I'm talking about people that I meet every now and then who work for the oil company.
We have to confine ourselves to one question. Lanny isn't even going to remember the series. So Lanny, sure, you can answer her earlier question.
Yeah, well, with respect to the environment, I would say that as mentioned, I have been involved in a number of organizations and efforts locally with respect to environmental issues over the years. And from an academic perspective, I've been published in Nature magazine, which is one of the leading scientific journals in the world on the area of paleoclimatology. So it is an area that I have some technical background in, as well as a background in economics. With respect to your question about the minimum wage, I don't know how germane that is to this discussion, and that's a different issue, but I support a higher minimum wage. But that isn't the issue here today. So I hope that's responsive to your two questions.
Thank you. Speaker here.
Oh, I had the feeling you weren't really responding to Measure P. You were saying they couldn't continue with normal extraction techniques. As I understand it, I think they can. And you were saying, I don't know, any number of things that had very little to do with what's really in Measure P. And I've seen that that advertisement on TV from the firemen and other people. They weren't talking about the truth of Measure P either. So
Okay, let's let Lanny
Yeah,
answer.
well, I think that my good friend Dave, said it the best in his presentation. Measure P is really substantial change. Those were his exact words. So I don't think it's accurate to characterize Measure P as nothing's going to happen. It's no big deal in terms of it's going to lead to really substantial change. Now, Shane Stark, in his presentation, said, we don't know what the legal ramifications ultimately are going to be. That's what I heard him say. So in terms of what would the effects of Measure P would be, I think Dave Davis said it best. It's going to be really substantial change. And in terms of what's the legal liability, again, I think Shane Stark said it well too. We just don't know at this point in time. What we do know is that the county of Santa Barbara has said that every single onshore well in Santa Barbara County at this point in time is using one of the productive processes or techniques that would be banned by Measure P. And in terms of, too, the effects on the future, no, it would be really substantial change. So I agree with Dave. I think that Measure P would be really substantial change, and it would have an effect of millions and millions of dollars of county tax revenue. It would have tremendous effect on local employment, and it would result in more oil and gas being produced and transported to the United States at great environmental cost. And as I say, that's why environmentalists should oppose Measure P.
Lanny, we have one more speaker that we're going to take. He's waited patiently.
Question by an announcement. Yesterday, I hosted a half-hour television interview with Dos Williams on the subject of Measure P in a program called Our View on Channel 17. It will begin broadcasting this Saturday, 5:30 p.m., and it will be rebroadcast 5 times a week through the entire month of October. I've been somewhat disappointed in both of your accounts by how little has been told us about what can happen as a result of fracking. I assume you are of course aware that in a given fracking operation, millions of gallons of water are used, into which are mixed at least 5,000 gallons of highly toxic materials. The oil companies won't tell us what they are, but we know...
We're going to have to end the questions here.
The question is, are you aware of the recent study that was published this week by researchers that at least 9% of the wells will fail? Their cement and steel casings will break, will split, and the methane that they contain will migrate into the water table. Are you aware of that?
Yeah. Once again, to respond to your question, there is no fracking going on in Santa Barbara County.
Now we're going to take general questions and let either speaker answer them. So some of the things you've been saving up, we can do now. But I wanted to tell you that this room is air conditioned. It's the only room in Louise Lowry Davis that is, and some of you may want to spend the whole rest of the day here because it's probably the only comfortable place in town. You got to the right place. Now, I think what we will do is, I think we will ask our runners to carry mics to people who have a question, and we're going to have to insist that you ask a single question. Multiple questions get too confusing, and we're not going to encourage any speeches. And I see that we have Linda Kropp from the Environmental Defense Center willing to ask a question of these two guys right this minute.
Thank you. My question is for Dave. Could you please respond to the statement that Measure P would shut down all oil production in Santa Barbara County?
Yeah, thank you. I I think I made it clear in my presentation, and I think you understood it, that conventional oil drilling will not be affected by Measure P. It's totally exempt. It does not cover conventional oil drilling. The statement that Lanny made came out of a study that the county did that was not accepted by the Board of Supervisors, by the way, actually said that long term, 100% of the wells basically will be affected. You know why? And I said it in my presentation. In the long term, basically, the oil is going to run out. And yes, everybody in the end is going to want to get the last drop out. So if you actually said, will it eventually affect the last drop? You bet. Is it going to affect the conventional oil drilling? The county study also said we're not going to see any effect in the near term. Long term, yeah, oil drilling is going to end. It's an extraction industry which has a finite resource. Oil industry, as we know it in Santa Barbara, will end. It is not an industry, if you will, like technology, agriculture, or tourism, which has a future. It has essentially an end. The question is, when will that end and how much will it cost? Lanny also talked about the UCSB Economic Forecast Project. I happen to sit on that particular board of directors also, and so I know Dr. Peter Ruppert real well. I've read that study really well. And on that particular one, after that Buellton session, which I thought was a cheerleading, we asked Dr. Ruppert, what about, because in the study that they did, they only talked about the benefits. They did not talk about the cost, not one iota of discussion of cost. So we asked him, what about the cost to the county? The roads, the infrastructure, the services. What about the life cycle cost to the county of those issues? What about the overall cost, in fact, of oil extraction affecting essentially climate change and the droughts that we have here? And he basically said that's not what the study was commissioned to do. It was only to show the benefits, right? So we have never had that analysis. We asked for a moratorium at the county to study these issues. Again, the industry said, no, don't want a moratorium. Asked for the moratorium at the state. We're told, no, we basically don't want a moratorium. We want to keep things going. We'll study it outside of a moratorium.
Dave, you're going to have to give Lanny equal time.
Oh, no, that's the problem. He will do well. Don't worry about it. Anyway, so your question is, essentially, it's going to shut down? No, not in the near term. Measure P allows conventional oil drilling to continue without any restriction at all. Those people who have vested rights or other issues that they can show the county will be able to continue, right? Only the extraction techniques, which are highly dangerous, will be prohibited.
Lanny.
Sure. Well, I think that in truth, I honestly believe that the proponents of Measure P are in some respects trying to have it both ways in terms of, is it going to affect our oil industry or not? And the point is that I think it's going to have a big effect, and they say it's going to have a big effect. But when it comes down to the specifics, well, it may not have such an effect. It's not 100%. But we all heard what Shane Stark said. What he said was, it's an uncertain question at this point in time, and we've heard what Dave has said in terms of that in time, yes, all the wells are going to be affected in terms of it's something that that will have influence. So it seems to me that this is a proposal, it's an initiative that would lead to greatly reduced oil and gas production in Santa Barbara County. That's what the intention of the initiative is, and I believe to try to say that it's something other than that isn't accurate.
That's one of the reasons the North County supervisors are very concerned about this particular issue. Do we have another question?
This is for Lanny, and it's a clarification of you suggesting that by allowing for this to go forward, voting no MP, that it would be environmentally good because we wouldn't be transporting oil around the world where regulations are less and there's all kinds of accidents. So just a clarification, does that mean that all this oil, this enormous amount of oil, will stay here in this county and not be transported somewhere else?
Yeah. And what I say is, that to me really is the root issue in terms of from an environmental perspective. And once again, I presume that 90% of the people in this room are people who would characterize themselves as environmentalists. And as I say, I share those concerns. I was raised in Santa Barbara. I've been involved in many of these issues, not always on the same side, but sometimes on the other side, and with the League of Women Voters. So but in terms of, the point is that oil that's produced in California onshore is going to remain in California in the United States. So the point is, that's the whole point. The reason why Measure P is so damaging to the environment is because it prevents local production, domestic production of oil and gas. Instead, it would shift production, for example, to Mexico, where they don't vent methane. There's 6 times, Mexico produces half the oil of, a fraction of the oil of the United States, but emits more methane. So the point is, for people who are environmentalists, what I would encourage you is really to consider these arguments in terms of, do we want to import more oil from Russia and Iraq? Do we want our servicemen and servicewomen abroad? I don't. So the point is, I think it's a legitimate belief. I think our environment will be better if Measure P fails.
Dave. I'd like.
Did you say California and the United States, or California in the United States?
California and the United States.
So not local.
Pardon?
Not local.
Well, I consider the United States to be much more local. I consider, oil produced in the United States to be much better than getting oil for the United States from Iraq or Russia or somewhere else.
So it will go to other parts of the U.S. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay, Dave has a comment.
Okay. My comment is, oil is a fungible commodity. We know that now, okay? We're talking about energy independence. Natural gas is being produced. We're going to be an energy exporter. Again, our position, as you know, is like move away from oil. In fact, the IPCC, right, the United Nations scientific community, has said 80% of the known reserves have to stay in the ground if we're basically going to stay away from the serious consequences of climate change. 80%. This is the dirtiest oil almost there is in the United States. If any oil should stay in the ground, it should be this at this time. Perhaps someday we'll learn how to clean that stuff up, but we ain't got that now. And if you all know the climate change issue, you lock this stuff in the next 5 years. The last thing Lanny also talked about that Shane said, doubt and uncertainty. And very frankly, as you all know, and I'm a little tired of it, the whole climate change discussion comes around to sowing doubt, sowing uncertainty. We've done that before, and it really works for the voters because they get scared. So yeah, if you say that, it basically frightens people. But frankly, I don't believe it.
I want to clarify one thing to make sure that everybody understands it. The use of the word fracking was normally used in the eastern United States to talk about getting to natural gas. When we talk about fracking in California, we are not talking about natural gas practically all of the time. We are talking about oil. And as Dave says, the oil quality in the North County field is not very good. And so bear in mind that this is not fracking for natural gas, which they are doing in North Dakota and the East. Bill Marks.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me? Thank you. I'm here today for myself. I'm a geologist, a resident, a taxpayer, and a mother. And I have a question for the first speaker, and something you could perhaps explain to me. I've read Measure P several times, and one issue I have is how it defines high-intensity petroleum operations. And it very explicitly states that the re-injection of produced water does fall under that definition. What most people don't perhaps realize is that virtually all of the wells in Santa Barbara County produce considerable amounts of produced water. This is produced formation water, not water you would use to drink or water your yard. How can you possibly say that conventional petroleum operations will not be affected when, by its own definition, virtually every well in the county will fall under its scope?
I'm not a geologist, so I can't answer your geologic questions. But I can say that conventional oil drilling as we know it, and the county has agreed, is exempt. Now, you're postulating essentially that all the wells will do that. I postulate that there are hundreds of wells out there, if not thousands today, that aren't doing that. But again, that's something which factually somebody can check out in that regard.
Lanny, did you have a comment about that?
Yeah, let me just one other comment. Take the big picture, guys. The big picture is that water is such a precious commodity. We really take it for granted. And again, if this drought is, again, if in fact the mega drought questions are even potentially halfway accurate, what we're looking about in terms of a change of climate is going to change everything. Lanny talked about the fact that Mexico vents their methane. Well, California just did a convention or a convention with the state, with Mexico, the president, to basically do new climate laws that basically reflect like AB 32 here in California. California is the leader. Frankly, what happens with Measure P will send a message to the state, to the nation, and elsewhere, right? This is where the environmental movement began. What happens with Measure P is much bigger than these little arguments over here. It has to do with the whole question of where we're going with the issue of climate change. It's where are we going with the issue of basically dealing with these fossil fuels that are, if you will, a legacy industry. It's where are we going with the future of our environment. And you can talk about the job here or the child there. I disagree with them. I don't think child poverty has to do with this. If you look at where the oil industry has happened, most of the jobs have been short-term. They've been highly technical. They bring in people from the outside. If you went to North Dakota today, what are their issues? Their issues are housing, schools, public health, and their roads. It's like it devastates small communities like Orchid and other places to have that amount of oil development. Right? It sounds very nice to look backwards, look forwards, look at basically what that potential is. And if they can get it scientifically, which I think they will, right, California will have an oil boom like no one has ever seen before. The issues that I've talked about, they're off the table. We're done.
Lanny, you have the last answer because we are going to run out of time and close the meeting at 2. But you're very welcome to respond to that.
Thank you. I just want to comment on one aspect of Dave's answer. And I would refer to, and his comment with respect to the oil jobs aren't significant, they're not long paying, they're not long lasting. This is the report by the UCSB Economic Forecast Project, Santa Barbara onshore oil and natural gas industry. Dave himself, as he mentioned, sits on the advisory board of the Economic Forecast Project. This is what that report says about the jobs that are going to be created and that are created. The average employee, this is in Santa Barbara County, in the oil and gas industry, earns an annual salary between $75,000 and $100,000 in sharp contrast to the median household income of $58,000. The fact of the matter is, Measure P would prohibit and make much more difficult economic development in Santa Barbara County. It would preclude tens of millions of dollars per year for public agencies, and it would hurt our environment. Please vote no on Measure P. Thank you very much.
We thank you all for coming. We're very glad you could join us in this discussion. And you can look for it on Channel 17 because we'll try to run the film on the public access channel. And you are excused. That worked way better than we expected.